The Book of Romans is the most theologically impactful book within Western Christianity.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Stick of Joseph YouTube channel. I'm currently underneath a tank barrel right now, which is pretty fun. But we're grateful that you're here. I think now more than ever, we understand the need to double down on our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we are grateful and feel privileged that you come to learn more about the scriptures and deepen your understanding of their depth and importance in our lives. And so I just ask, if you find value in what you're about to watch or any of our other videos that you've seen, please share it with others. And without further ado, Brian Thomassen.
Welcome to the Stick of Joseph. I am Dave D. John Butler, sometimes called Big Mustard by those in the know and aggressive to me. But welcome back to the show here in the studio with our longtime friend Brad Whitbeck and with our new friend Brian Thomassen. And very excited because recently met Brian and discovered he's got a lot of very interesting areas he's got a lot of thought going on, interesting areas. And I think today we're going to talk about the Epistle to the Romans, and Brian's going to teach it to us.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would add to that is the way that that we know each other is because we're both performers at Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And, Dave is so adept at the high trapeze, he's just called the spider monkey.
Yeah. Whoa. Which is good because I'm also the performing bear.
Yeah.
So the bear and the high trapeze, they call it the monkey.
It's a good combo.
It really brings in the crowds in Vegas.
Oh, man. I have not been there in a long time.
Yeah.
And when we're up on the high wire, one of the things that we do in our troupe is we talk about the Book of Romans.
100%.
Oh, well,
It's a favorite.
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to attempt to do is, as far as just framing is concerned, if you think about your history at the church, how often have you heard anybody that has ever had a sacrament talk that had any type of a focus on the Book of Romans, or somebody that even references the Book of Romans in one of their talks? Doesn't typically happen much, I would think.
It's definitely not common. I have seen it happen, but I think it's primarily in reference, right? People will reference things that are talked about maybe once or twice in the Book of Romans, supporting their idea that they're going for, not really talking too much about the Book of Romans itself.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because the Book of Romans is the most theologically impactful book within Western Christianity by a wide margin. It is the book that Augustine cites as pivotal in his conversion to Christianity.
Really?
It is the text that Luther used. Luther was an Augustinian monk, but it's the book that he uses as the baseline for creating the theology that Lutheranism is tied to. It is the book that Melanchthon used, that Zwingli used, that Bucer used, that Calvin used. It informs the Reformed tradition in a fundamental way. So you have all of that going on, and then with the restored gospel, not a lot of coverage.
Yeah.
And my feeling for why that is the case is that a lot of the membership are engaging the text from the perspective of Protestant theology. The baggage, the assumptions that are being used to inform how they engage the text is already being filtered through multiple centuries that I think are anachronistic.
Oh, fascinating. Because, at least for me, the most quoted part of Romans is in Romans 8, where it talks about being joint heirs with Christ. And I feel like we take that and we're able to say, here's how this helps show what we believe as LDS people.
Yeah.
But you're probably right. The rest of the book, I doubt I could do that with, right? Like if I were to go through it,
Right. What's in Romans 1? Some stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think about why, and I'm not sure. I don't know that I have an answer, but I wonder if just because it seems that we lean heavily into the Gospels
Right.
Right. And I wonder if LDS tradition just has almost an aesthetic or aesthetic theological preference for narrative over disputation and exhortation and what's in the epistles, because I do think we basically cherry pick bits out of there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, what do they who are baptized for the dead? Look, there's baptism for the dead, right?
Right. And what you see, for those that do engage the text, it seems to fit into two groups. You've got one which are, say, biblical scholarship, and most of those individuals, they've got, I think, fundamentally, it's a linguistic engagement, right? So if somebody's interested in the New Testament, they're going to be studying Koine Greek, and then augment that with maybe a bit of archaeology or some historical context or something along those lines. But fundamentally, it's going to be textual analysis looking at the Koine Greek, right? And that perspective alone is going to be, at best, an adumbration, right? Which is a perspective as opposed to a full, like a facade. There are other aspects of what could be engaged, but they don't, because there is only that one direction. So that's on the secular side of things.
Yeah.
And then the other camp are going to be sectarian academics. And what typically happens there is they engage the text to mine it for things to reinforce their own dogma. Right? So in both of those instances, they're not really approaching it from the perspective of the text proper. There is something that is mitigating the interpretation. And I think that's a flaw and an error.
Rather than taking a look at it and seeing, what does the text actually just say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, that's interesting. So thinking about obviously, if we were to think about what are the ways you could approach the epistles, and I confess I have read a lot of Bible commentary, but actually never on the epistles. So I'm totally speculating here. Archaeology, probably not right. It's not like the archaeology of Rome is going to provide a lot of obvious clues to what the Epistle to the Romans is talking about, right? Presumably, it seems to me like one of the areas you would want to approach it from would be sort of audience, right? Hey, he wrote this to somebody. What do we think their expectations were that inform, or what did they know that informed how they would understood what he was saying, right? What disputes were they involved in with other Christians or with non-Christians, right?
Right.
Sort of their context. So maybe not the archaeology of Rome, but something about the sociology might be interesting.
That's exactly the direction that I'm planning on going.
Oh, awesome.
Exactly right. Is you have to, any piece of rhetoric is going to be informed by its audience. And if you ignore that, things are going to go amok easily, very quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, because I find all the time I will be talking with creedal Christians, primarily evangelicals, who will cite things to me from the Pauline epistles saying, oh, well, here's how we know that we don't need anything else. I'm like, do you not understand that these are letters written by Paul to these people, begging them to stop giving up on the gospel that they had just been given, right?
Yeah.
What makes you think that they actually kept to it that whole time? The entire set of the Pauline epistles, I would actually say, is a really good evidence for the apostasy.
For the apostasy.
Yeah.
Things were already falling apart.
When you start considering the audience.
Right.
And
so if you take the position that I'm framing, that understanding of the Book of Romans is fundamentally informed by an Augustinian perspective, then the question is, well, what was that perspective?
Okay.
So we assume that Book of Romans was written in the mid-50s, right? 55, 54.
It's one of the earlier ones.
Right. When is Augustine about? He's in the latter part of the 4th century. So what does that mean? That means that a lot of what he is bringing to the table is itself anachronistic. So, for example, he assumes a Jewish-Christian split that didn't exist in the 50s, right? In the 50s, the temple is still extant, right? Titus and his legions have not destroyed it, right? I mean, there's the quasi-mythical Council of Jamia, right, with Rabbi Akiba, where they're deciding what does it mean to be a Jew in this post-sacking destruction of the temple.
Isn't that
right?
circa 70 AD?
90 AD.
Is it 90? Okay.
Right around there. Assuming it happened. We don't really know for sure.
Yeah.
But they're the ones, it's at that point where they say, well, if you believe that Jesus was the Messiah, you're not part of us. You're something else, right? So that's where you can see this divide occur. But in the 50s, that hasn't happened, right?
Okay.
The Jesus movement is a movement within a larger Judaism,
Yep.
right? But Augustine, it's already happened, right? So there's a divide.
It
That
happened a long time ago.
a long time ago, right? And so he's seen that as an informing lens on how he's interpreting Romans that didn't exist when Paul was writing, right? So that's one example. Another one is Augustine's interpretation of Romans is going to be informed by what was going on with him, which is fundamentally a struggle against Pelagianism and the Manichaeans. You want me to explain what?
Yeah,
that
let's
is?
talk about those. So those are from his point of view heretical movements.
I definitely know everything about both
The
of those
Pelagians
groups.
and the Manichaeans.
Yeah.
I don't need a refresher on any of those.
So Augustine goes through, he writes his autobiography, which is the Confessions, where he explains his movement from when he was young all the way up.
Yeah.
And in the late 380s, he is back in North Africa, which is where he was born, and he has assumed a bishop's status, and he is engaged with another guy named Pelagius, who was a monk from England. And Pelagius had gone on a pilgrimage to Rome, and when he arrived there, he was disgusted at the deprivation, the sin, the squalor, the depravity of the people. And so he put in a lot of energies to reforming and re-Christianizing the city. And the issue was that he was focusing on the idea of that good works are meritorious. And that was a problem for Augustine because he was worried that if you give value to good works, wither the need of Christ. That you could remove Christ from the equation, that you can assume you can earn your salvation, and that's not kosher. So he went after Pelagius for that point. And then with the Manichaeans are a group that comes out of east of the Roman Empire, and they have sort of a Zoroastrian influence, which is a duality, that there's this cosmic battle between right and wrong that is playing itself out on a multitude of levels. And they liked Paul because of Paul's language, which has sort of this weakness and strength, and he's using those binaries. And so they said, yeah, Paul's on our side. And so Augustine was fighting against the Manichaeans, saying, no, you guys aren't even Christians. And he was fighting against Pelagianism because he was saying, no, you're thinking you can earn your way to heaven, which is what those dirty Jews are doing, right? And both of those guys are wrong. That the actuality is we are depraved, we are totally dependent on Christ's salvatory power, and there's nothing that we can do to alleviate that, right? Remember that Augustine is the guy who invents original sin. That comes from him, right?
Oh, I did not know that.
That is an Augustinian invention.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the interesting points about that is he's called Saint Augustine in the West, but in the Eastern Christian tradition, he's not a saint.
Oh,
and the reason is because the Greeks thought that makes no sense. The idea that you can inherit sin, and they said, no, we're not going with that.
So in our articles of faith, we're not down with Augustine.
Yeah, well,
Right off the
Augustine. So what I'm putting forward is that Augustine creates that as a trope to go against Pelagius.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this is it. So if I step back, so let's just kind of set the stage here. What we want to do is get into Romans, but this discussion up front is, hey, we got to free ourselves of preconceptions that we have.
Right.
And where do these preconceptions come from? Well, we get them sort of proximately from the Protestant reformers, from Luther, Melanchthon, et cetera.
Right.
But your point is, hey, what they're doing is reading Augustine,
Right,
and what he says about them, right? And so we have to understand, hey, there might be some text of Romans that he found useful to interpret a certain way or to really lean on in one direction because that tended to refute Pelagianism.
Right.
Or because that tended to excommunicate Manichaeans.
Right.
Right. Where actually maybe there's a better reading for Romans.
And the further difficulty is that Augustine didn't know Greek.
Oh, that's excellent.
Huh.
So he was cut off from the larger classical tradition as well as the roots of the Jesus movement itself.
So, and remind me, did you already say Augustine's North African, isn't he?
Yeah,
Isn't he,
he's in what would be modern-day Tunisia.
which is of Hippo, isn't he? Augustine of Hippo? Yeah, okay.
Right.
Okay, so Tunisia. So he's working in Latin.
Yeah, he's a Latin guy. He doesn't know Greek.
Yeah.
Whereas Pelagius did.
Yeah.
Pelagius could go both ways.
Interesting.
And that kind of plays out. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's one really informing element. The other one that I think is critical is, say, versification and paragraphs. None of that is part of the original Pauline text. When you would write, right, they don't have paragraphs. They don't have any of that, right? All of the apostrophication doesn't exist in Greek, right? When you're going through the paideia of learning literary text and interpretation, that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Right. That's why chiasmus has value. Right. Chiasmus is a Greek word that means cross. Right. And that was a device where you could see thematic shifts.
Yes.
Right. It's not exclusive to the Greeks. Right. The Hebrews, a lot of different groups did it, but that's one of the reasons, is because it doesn't have the clean divisions like we do. But when Augustine has it, that's already happened.
Yeah, the words themselves in a chiasm will tell you, I have reached the middle now.
Right.
Now I have reached the end.
Right.
Rather than someone putting in chapter whatever.
Right.
We were talking off camera earlier about Nephi's apocalypse, and I said, hey, if you go through 1 Nephi 11 to 14, you see 12 times the formulation from Nephi's guides, look, and I looked and I beheld. And like that is the marker, right? It's words.
Right.
Because on the brass plates, just like on Greek handwritten, you probably have just a continuous, undifferentiated mass of letters.
That's right. Which makes it really tough, right? So whatever it is that Augustine has is written in Latin, and it's already has the versification. And that means it's going to influence how you read the text.
Yeah.
Right? So there are divisions that occur within how he had it that didn't exist in the original work at all. So a simple example would be, say, like if we go to, say, Romans 1:32, and then you look at Romans 2 verse 1.
Are they really split?
They're split in the text, and because of that split, you miss the entire point that is being made at the end of chapter 1.
That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Therefore.
The therefore is put into the next chapter. And so people just completely miss it.
That's so fantastic.
Who did the chapter and verse breakdowns for these? Like,
there's a number of people. No. This is early on.
Like, is it Vulgate? Like, where?
So the Vulgate is in 410, right?
Okay.
Saint Jerome does the Vulgate in 410. Prior to that, you've got a variety of things called the Vedas Latinas. And those are a variety of texts that are being translated into Latin, and all of that is happening basically in the 4th century. And there's a number. They're not in simpatico. Different ones will have different ways of numbering things. So, for example, there's one version that takes the Pauline corpus, and they just go chapter 1, chapter 2, and they go through everything that they considered that was written by Paul. So whether it's Ephesians or it's Galatians or it's Romans, and it's just chapter 1, Hebrews? Chapter 4, chapter 23, chapter 35, and it just goes.
Wow.
Right.
Fantastic.
So you've got all kinds of funky things that are going on at that time.
That is interesting.
But what that means is when you do that, that the text becomes a vehicle through establishing dogma, as opposed to reading it as a rhetorical piece or as a dialectic.
Yeah.
And that changes things. And so what does that mean for Augustine? He is going to do a couple key things. One of them is he's going to internalize Paul's rhetoric. Okay? It's about me, the reader. 2, he's going to individualize Paul's rhetoric, right? So it becomes an internal dynamic and it becomes individualized. And then he's going to generalize a lot of the concepts, like the concept of, say, like a reification, like justification, grace, law, works, right? There's a reification. Do you know what that means?
So race is a thing. It's turning them into a thing.
Yeah. So it's a logical fallacy where you take a concept and then you give it ontological status, where you say it actually exists in the universe. Okay. Right. So if I said like unicorn, right, and you understand what a unicorn is, and I can give you all kinds of detail of what it is, we come to an agreement, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually unicorns.
Yeah.
Reification would mean that from the definition, you now assert that it actually exists.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
And so Augustine does that on a conceptual level with things like works and justification and what have you, right? And then the other thing is that he makes pride the fundamental sin that is being grappled with in Romans. And he's going to say that that's where the Jews have gone awry, is because they think that through loyalty to the law, they can achieve X, Y, and Z, and they're wrong. And it's actually, we're totally dependent, right? Which goes back to what we were talking about earlier as far as the need for original sin as a benchmark. Because if you've got original sin in there, there's nothing you can do because you're tainted from birth, right? So it becomes a perfect vehicle for him to then move forward with his position. So once you get that, then the question is, okay, so let me give you an example of this. This is from Romans 3:24. Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Okay? So if you read that and then you apply an Augustinian perspective, you've got grace is hierarchical, right? You're receiving it from above, right? Grace is sort of like a boon, right? Or a good that they're given to a recipient, right? The grace is unjustified, right? Is something given from above to one who is undeserving. And the recipient is passive. Does that make sense? So you've got you've got the hierarchical model, you've got that it's a good given from an above source that is unjustified, and they do it out of their goodness, what have you, and the recipient is passive. All 4 of those notions are anachronistic. That's not the way that grace would have been understood in the 50s by a Greco-Roman audience at all.
Interesting.
Oh, that's cool.
So how would a Greco-Roman at the time that they received Paul's epistle have understood it? Grace in Greek is charis, okay? And charis is a reciprocal relationship, okay? It is that there's a demand that is on the giver to bestow a favor. So if I give you something, then something should be coming back, which means that that passivity doesn't work, okay? Also, that it's active and it's cyclical. So a good example of this you can find is we've got charis, but then in Greek myth you've got the charites, or the gratii in Latin, which are usually depicted as 3 young women, and they're usually in like a circular dance. And one of them is often like giving something, one is receiving, and then the third one is returning a gift. Right? And it plays out over and over and over again. And that's not exclusive to the Greeks. This is a model that actually is much, much older. So like in Japanese, we would say onkaishi, which is when you receive something and then you're obligated to return something back. There is no passivity. And there's no sense of unjustified, but rather something of benefit is given. Go ahead.
Oh, so have we kept that Augustinian like lens on this because our culture is very Western, and that's why it's stuck around so hard?
So Augustine is the most influential theologian in the Western Christian tradition. Within Catholicism, within Protestantism, he is the guy.
Yeah.
And that informs how Christianity is going to be understood in the West up to today. And so if you were to go to, say, an evangelical pastor, he's going to be reading it from an Augustinian lens.
Okay.
And he's probably not even going to be aware that it's Augustinian.
Yeah.
Because it has become so embedded into the mindset over the past millennia and more.
Super interesting to have this. This is not a very good analogy, but like it sort of reminds me of the hymn writer Isaac Watts, who wrote like 600 hymns or something. And most people have no idea what his name is, but like they have sung a dozen Isaac Watts Christmas carols.
Right.
He's like a secret master of Western culture, right?
Yeah.
And so like Augustine is turning out to be sort of a secret master of Western culture also, right? In that I think most LDS people would say, well, I'm not Protestant and my theology is not informed by a Protestant reading. And of course I'm not Catholic. And some old monk in 390 AD he'd be a Catholic, right? So I'm like, obviously I'm, my interpretation comes from Joseph Smith, but actually culture is very complicated and we're carrying around this stuff without realizing it.
Right. I think that we see that within the church on a variety of levels because we have the growth of the church within the Americas, which is predominantly a Protestant model.
Yeah.
You've got people converting from Protestantism into the church, and they're going to bring their understanding with them.
Yeah, for sure. Without intending
And
to,
they don't
right?
know it. Yeah.
Sure. It's the lens through which they receive the gospel.
That's right.
So it's interesting that sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no. I was just thinking about how this makes it so difficult to believe the Bible as far as it is translated correctly, right? Because it's not only as far as it's like literally translated the words, but like the lens through which you're reading
It's
those
how it's
words.
understood, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
hermeneutic that informs the entire project. So it's not just the thing that you're engaging, but how it's being understood.
Yeah, which fascinatingly, I feel like every denomination kind of believes that.
Yeah.
But we're the only ones with the guts to actually say it. Like, otherwise, why are they learning Greek? Like, you don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Why are you looking into this? But I think taking it that step further to understand the audience that was being written to, that's so fascinating. That's very good. I love that you're bringing all of this up. So,
Yeah. There's I was just going to sort of venture an example of charis maybe, right? So as you're talking about this and the gratiae and the charites, I was thinking maybe like a good image for understanding this is something like a royal or a temple procession, right, where gifts are being given to the crowd, but it isn't for nothing.
Right.
It's in the context of your relationship with the queen or king or with the temple, right, and the god.
Right.
And you're expected to show up to do your share of harvesting the temple's crops, right? And to sacrifice your firstborn pig of the litter. And there are obligations the other way.
Right. So at a core level, it's relational,
Yeah.
right? An active relationship where something is coming and something is going and it continues on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
So that I think is a pivotal distinction that on a baseline level means that the text is radically different from how it was originally versus how it has been received in the tradition.
Just thinking from the mind of somebody who would look at this and be like, well, he's focused on just grace, but earlier in 24 it says being justified freely by his grace, right? Is there anything we can learn from the words there, like being justified freely from
Well,
by
there's
his
no
grace?
compulsion, right?
Okay. So it's not that it's freely as in no cost associated with what you're doing. It's God is not compelled to do that.
Think about it in terms of xenia or hospitalia, right? Which are that's the Greek and Latin that has to do with the guest relationship, which is considered sacred, right? So if you're a merchant and you go into another town and you are received, your host, he wasn't obligated to receive you, but once he has done so, now there are certain obligations that come into play, and the relationship starts to form and crystallize.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of along those lines. So the Lord was not obligated, but he did it, right, because he loves us, per se, right?
Yeah.
Or in the Xenia model, right? Because you realize there's some benefit's going to come from this, right? I can get something from this guy who has traveled from some place, It's going to be a win-win, basically.
Yeah.
And that's the way that you should understand. So there's a reference in Sophocles' Ajax, the tragedy, where Ajax says, favor begets favor. And that's the way it should be understood.
Yeah.
It's not singular. It's not one time. It just goes and goes and goes and goes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right. So now think about it in these terms, which goes back to what Dave brought up earlier about the intended audience. Who was the audience that Paul was writing to?
The Romans.
That's right.
I knew that one.
That's right.
Well done.
You got it. Now, think about this. What language do they speak in Rome?
Latin.
So why is he writing in Greek?
Boy, that's an interesting question.
Now, think about this. Think about if, say, Joseph Smith had written an epistle to the people of London, and then he wrote it in French. Now, if that happened, right, say we're in the mid-1830s, early 40s, and he writes this piece and he sends it off to London and it's in French, there would be people that could read that.
And we would assume he was writing for a particular community in London.
Correct.
We would
Not
say it's
London in
Huguenot refugees or it's something like that.
Yeah. Because if he were doing that, what type of people in the 19th century in London would be able to understand French? They would have had a certain education. A certain social standing would be there, right? The Huguenots have already gone. That's multiple centuries past, right?
Refugees from the Revolution, maybe.
Yeah.
Aristocrats.
So if Paul...
Or just the best bakers around.
The best bakers.
Yeah.
Maybe. So if Paul is writing to Romans who are Latin speakers in Greek, that means that his audience has a certain socio-economic standing because they would have been educated in the Greek tradition. That tells us something, which is really interesting, right? So from that, where do we go? What type of person, if we said, well, they're Romans and they can understand Greek, why would they be interested in something from Paul?
Yeah, this is super interesting. So, again, never having read a commentary on Romans, so I'm just trying to trying to go where you're leading us.
Yeah.
So, are we dealing here with like an international, an expat kind of audience? Are they possibly? Is it possible that he is writing to Jews who are? Because I think there was a. I don't remember where I read this.
He names some individuals that are clearly Jewish, but there are multiple times. I think there's over like 15 different instances where he says to the Gentiles.
In Romans.
In Romans, right? I mean, I've got a few of them here. Like, to all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace unto you, the Father, Lord Jesus Christ. So he says, to all that be in Rome. But then that immediately is followed by, I speak to you, Gentiles, insomuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles.
Yeah,
right?
interesting.
And they've got that kind of language all over the place. There's not a single instance where he says, I'm speaking to Jews.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so it's a class that's either sort of for socioeconomic reasons knows Greek because that is the language of the Hellenistic international culture.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not Jews, but it's people who are not Roman but in Rome, right? Because Greek is sort of a lingua franca, and you could reach Gentiles, but Syrians or whatever.
That's possible. But we've got this larger question.
Yeah.
Why would people in Rome be interested in this piece of rhetoric coming from Paul? The Judeans are a conquered people. They are an irrelevancy. They are one province within a larger established empire. The fact that they were conquered means that they're inferior. What do these people have to offer us? Why would they care? Right? I think the answer lies in understanding a concept of enkratia.
Okay.
Enkratia means self-mastery. What do the Jews have that they can bring to that equation? The Jews are a conquered, irrelevant people, a minor nation among a host of nations that Rome is dealing with and have dealt with in spectacular military fashion, right? Why do we care about the Jews? One thing that we can say about the Jews is they've been around a long time, right? And Romans, as a practical people, recognize that that which persists must have some type of baseline value. The fact that they've been around a long time means that there's something that they're doing. What is it that they're doing? The Mosaic Law. What does the Mosaic Law do? It establishes discipline. It is a vehicle through which self-mastery could be achieved. And we see this playing out on an earlier front with Philo of Alexandria. He's doing the same thing, where he's arguing to a larger Gentile audience, the value that you can find within Judaism is we have the Mosaic Law, and through adherence to those principles, you can learn self-mastery. And self-mastery is critically important. Romans are a martial people. What is a key component of military success? Discipline. Who's the earliest convert, the earliest Gentile convert? Cornelius. Is this a Roman centurion? Right? And then we've got references in Acts to the God-fearers, which we assume are Gentiles who are going to synagogues. What kind of guys would those be? Most likely, if they're in the Palestinian area, they're probably soldiers. So they're interested in self-discipline. They're interested in self-mastery. And they see these guys, these people that have got a regimen to their lifestyle that has a certain attraction. That is how Paul is going to play this. That is what is going to be informing his argument in this text. You want self-mastery? I'm going to show you how you can get it. And it's going to be through the lens of Christ, ultimately.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, there's so much I don't know. I'm always afraid to open my mouth, Brian, because people will realize I don't know anything. Stoicism.
We're going to talk about that.
Okay. All right. So I'll let you talk about it when good, because I'm sure you know more than I do. So why not Latin though? So you asked that question, but I don't know that I know the answer. That's really interesting. Why do you think it's in Greek?
I think it's in Greek because that is the language of the literati. It is the lingua franca, like you said. I don't think that Paul knew Latin.
Yeah.
And I looked, because that was a question that I had is, well, why wouldn't you write in Latin?
Yeah.
You'd get a larger audience. But we don't have any examples of early copies of the Book of Mormon that are in Latin. The earliest one I found was the 4th century.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah. All of the early stuff is in Greek. Yeah. All of it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, right? So if self-mastery is a critical component and it would have a certain resonance for a literate people, right? And literacy is a key marker of Greco-Roman society, right? It is one of the things that you have to have if you're going to rise in the ranks of society. You have to be educated in the classical model of paideia, right? You don't have people that are going to be going up the list that are not part of that. Everything in your social strata is tied to that type of model. So I'm going to read to you what I think is the core trope of the Book of Romans, which is from Romans 19. For the good that I would, I do not. But the evil which I would not, that I do. This is also mirrored in verse 15. So it gets a twofer in chapter 7.
Okay, so Romans 7:19 was what we just read.
Right. For the good that I would, I do not. But the evil which I would not, that I do. Now, I'm going to guess that for neither one of you, that nothing like kicks up.
Oh, for me, that is the good that I would, I do not. Like the things that I want to do that are good, I don't do those things. But the evil that I want to not do, I do that, right? I am always going back to that ice cream bucket, and I can't stop myself.
It's not evil.
And I don't work out the way that I want to, like that kind of,
Right. So there's a tension that's being illustrated there, right? A dilemma that is occurring.
Yeah.
For any Greco-Roman to hear this would be akin to How about to be or not to be? If I say to be or not to be, everybody in the English-speaking world is going to pick up on that as a literary reference. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's Shakespeare. And then there's a significant number of people that would say, well, that's from Hamlet, right? So you might have various layers of knowledge, but everybody recognizes that as a quote, right? And then they say, oh, it's Shakespeare, or they might know that it's Hamlet. This is a quote.
Oh, interesting.
It's not arbitrary.
Okay. Who's it quoting?
It is coming from Euripides, from Medea.
Oh.
So it's a direct reference to that tragedy. So let me explain that to you, because I'm going to guess there's not a lot of people that have classics education going on.
Is it a quote from Medea herself?
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think I've read Medea. So Medea is she's a witch who helps Jason and sacrifices her children to assist him in his quest, but is abandoned.
That's right. So to flesh it out. So we're going back into Greek myth, right? And probably just to flesh that out even more, the Greeks not only invented rationality, but they also invented allegory. So they took their mythic traditions and then they would interpret them, right? What is behind the story? Why is it significant? What is it meaningful about? So in the Argonautica, which is Apollonius's rendering of the story of Jason goes on the quest for the Golden Fleece, and he gathers this group of heroes, which includes like Castor and Pollux and
Heracles is in there.
Hercules is there, all to go off on this quest because he's a prince without a kingdom, and he's trying to establish his kingdom, and he's given this quest. So he goes on this great adventure. He goes to a place called Colchis, which is for the Greeks on the edge of the world, which is the very edge of the Black Sea. That's where Medea is. She's the princess of Aeetes, who's the king who has the Golden Fleece, and she falls in love with Jason. And she's a sorceress, like you said. So she helps Jason, and so he's able to get the fleece, and then she leaves and goes with him, and then they return, right? Happy ending, huzzah! But that's not how it plays out. Years pass, and even though he was successful in his quest, the kingship eludes him. And in the play that Euripides writes, it's those years after the quest has accomplished, and he doesn't have his kingdom, and Jason is thinking, well, I've got to do something, and there's this princess of this other neighboring kingdom, and if I marry her, I will have an ally, I will have an army, and then we can do something. And Medea finds out about this, and she's not a happy camper because she's committed herself to Jason, right? She's shown her loyalty. They have 2 children together, and now Jason is looking like he's going to be going off with someone else. She's angry. She's bitter. She's in turmoil. So she wants revenge. What does she do?
She kills her own children.
She kills her own children as revenge against Jason's betrayal.
Oh.
So this phrase is right at that point where she's deliberating to act or not to act.
Wow.
Right? The good that I would not, right? That I do.
Well, I'm disappointed that there's not a footnote here telling me that's from Euripides.
Yeah.
That would be interesting, actually.
Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah. This is a hallmark of the distance between the original and the culture in which it was written and what happens afterwards.
100%.
Right? People are not reading that stuff in that phrase anymore. And I mentioned the versification, and everything turns into a check on dogma, right? As opposed to the rhetoric that informs the piece. And so this gets lost.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what's going on there. There's the dilemma, and then you have her going back and forth, and then what happens? She commits the act. Right? The great action. And this is highly significant for a Greco-Roman audience. Why? Because Medea is the quintessential example of the polar opposite of enkratia, self-mastery, which is akrasia, which is weakness of the will. No mother would want to kill her own children. But because she gives in to her passions, she does that. That is akrasia. That is weakness of the will. Okay? Now, Euripides wrote his play in 430 BC. That's hundreds of years before Paul is using this as a literary device. So I need to ground this for you, right? So it's not just a bald assertion on my part.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm going to give you some references. So this is from Ovid, who is one of the great Roman writers that is semi-contemporaneous with Paul. And he wrote on Medea, I see the better and approve it, but I follow the worse, right? So he's making reference to that. Epictetus, right? Stoic philosopher who is also contemporaneous. And he wrote on Medea. And this is a quote from him. What she wants to do, she doesn't do. And what she doesn't want, she does, right? So he's playing off of that as well. Then we have Seneca, who is at the same time as Paul, who also writes his own version of Medea. And Paul directly quotes him, right? It's the telai poros ergo anthropos, which is what a wretched one I am, which is in Paul. That's verse 24. And so Paul is aware of Seneca, and he directly quotes Seneca in the epistle. Directly. That verse 24 is Seneca.
So interesting.
Dude.
Right? So not only do we have Euripides' play, we've got it being repeated over and over and over and over within the Roman tradition. Now the question is, why? Why does Medea have this type of resonance with the Romans? What's the fundamental demarcation within the Hellenistic mind? It's the Greek versus the barbarian, right? And the Romans are going to adopt that as their own marker. Right, we are the superior, right? So for the Greeks, it's linguistic. For the Romans, it's going to be tied ultimately to citizenship, right? But there is that which is superior, that which has reason, that which has self-mastery, that which is destined to be masters of the world. And you have the barbaric hosts that are slaves to their passions, that are unreliable, that are feckless, right? Medea is an example of that. She is the dangerous other because she was a non-Greek. She comes from outside the Greek world into the Greek world. What does she do? She kills her kids. That's why you can't trust the foreigner. That's why the other is dangerous. And the Romans are going to use that as a rhetorical device over and over to compare themselves against that which they conquer. Why are we superior? Not only because of our force of arms, but we're culturally superior. We're mentally superior. We have self-mastery. They do not. They are slaves to their passions. Make sense?
Super interesting. I mean, one of the things you're showing us here, and I don't know how far you would want to push this, but is that to whatever extent literature is in dialogue with itself, right? It's a curious conversation because time means it's one way, right? But you, the writer, quote, paraphrase, rebut, agree or disagree with books that went before you. And so there's this stream, and you're showing us that in this Greco-Roman stream, and particularly in the Roman piece, you've got this idea of Medea associated with the utter undiscipline of the uncivilized hordes, right? If she's in the western part of the Black Sea, that's the steppes. She's like a Scythian or something. She's right, and that Paul, Romans, should be seen as being in that flow of dialogue, right? Is Paul maybe also in dialogue in some places with the Hebrew Bible or Hebrew writings, maybe? But what you're showing us now is, man, Paul is in dialogue with the literary traditions of Rome.
Right. So we can ask ourselves the question: was Paul a Greco-Roman who was a Jew?
Yeah. Or
is he a Jew who's a Greco-Roman?
Yeah.
And we tend to interpret it off of the latter, and it could very well be the former. Because remember, he was a Roman citizen. And we have to think about that because people don't understand how significant that is.
Yeah.
At this time of the empire, those that are subject to Rome, only maybe around 5% are Roman citizens. And of those, the vast majority would be in Italy. And to be a Roman citizen, your parents had to be Roman citizens, particularly your father.
Yeah.
So that means that there's already something that is established. And he's a thoroughly Hellenized Jew, right? Remember that off the cuff, at least the way it's presented in Acts, I mean, he's quoting Aratus. He's quoting Epimenides. He's quoting here, as I'm showing, Seneca. He knows the literary tradition of the Greco-Roman world. And he's comfortable in that space, right? And remember, Judaism, we often think about Judaism in terms of the fissures within greater Jerusalem, the Sadducees and what have you, right? The Essenes that are out there in the desert. But there was a larger fracturing that was going on, at least on 3 different levels. You had the Jews that were in Babylon,
Sure.
completely outside of the Roman space.
Sure.
And what's going on at this time frame? This is when the Talmud is being written, right? And there is a Babylonian Talmud that you can get today, right? Which is different from the Jerusalem Talmud, which we also have. We have both of those, right? So we've got the Jews in Babylon, then we've got the Judeans, and then we've got a third group, which are the Hellenized Greeks, which are basically centered around Alexandria, right? The Septuagint is an example of the Alexandrian Jews, right? And these are the guys, Philo is part of that group. They're the ones that are engaging with the Greeks on their own terms. And they're saying, yeah, we can talk. We can have a dialogue with each other. We're not so far apart. What you believe in and what we believe in, there's a certain meeting of the minds that's possible. And Paul is part of that world, right? Yeah. When he quotes from the Tanakh, he's quoting the Septuagint.
Yep.
Right? That's his text. And the Septuagint, that's the Greek version of the Old Testament.
Yep.
Right? That's his universe. So there is that question. Is he a Greco-Roman who's a Jew, or is he a Jew that's a Greco-Roman? Which of those two do we prioritize?
Yeah. And it's interesting that he says of himself the tribe of Benjamin, right? Which already sort of seems like it's if he's a Jew, he's some kind of an outsider Jew. It doesn't feel like he's not of the tribe of Judah. He's Benjamin's the smaller tribe associated with Judah.
Right.
Super interesting.
And see, and we can even nail this down even further within the near history of when Paul is writing. What was going on? We had the great civil war between Octavian and Antony, right? Which occurs we have the great Battle of Actium, right, in 32 BC, which is what is going to allow the establishment of the Roman Empire. How was Antony depicted from Octavian's side? He is seen as the puppet of who? Cleopatra. Cleopatra is
barbarian queen,
shown as a Medea figure.
Yeah.
That's how she was depicted within Rome. She is the seductress. She's the one that has corrupted a Roman citizen, turned him into her toy for her own devices. Yeah. Right? That's how they depicted it, that Antony had been seduced, right? Yeah. Corrupted.
Yeah, bewitched.
And we have to fight against the dangerous other. And that's what Cleopatra was. And the site of where the Battle of Actium, it was a naval battle, but right off the coast there, Octavian, right, who becomes Augustus, he builds this giant stele commemorating the battle, which is tied to Apollo. And it is all based on the idea of we are defending reason and order against the enemy, which was fundamentally, on a rhetorical level, Cleopatra, the other, and the dangers of the other. And we could have lost, and all would have been gone if the enemy had won hold.
So how is Paul weaving that into this epistle here?
So that's the key, right? So he's saying you want self-mastery, right? I'm going to show you how to do that. But what's the problem? So imagine that you are a Roman, and maybe you were a centurion like Cornelius or someone else, and you've become interested in Judaism. And so you're one of the God-fearers. So you are adopting Mosaic elements of the Mosaic law. You're trying to live that life. What Paul is arguing here is you will fail. You're going to fail, and you're going to fail over and over and over again. Why? Because he's going to argue it's unnatural. That you are co-opting something that isn't intrinsic to who you are as your people. It's like trying to move from one civilizational more to another. You don't understand the nuances of it. You don't understand the force of it. It's artificial, and therefore it will have no real hold on you, and you will fail. And so what Paul is ultimately going to do, which is really kind of clever and shows what a master he was in this regard, is he's flipping everything on its head. Is he's saying, you Romans present yourselves as the civilized folk, as the ones who are the possessors of reason and self-mastery.
Interesting.
But in reality, you're slaves to your passions. and you won't be able to overcome that through some type of artificial means, which is a false fidelity to the law. It will not work for you. You will revert back to what it is. Now, let me give you an example. Let me read to you something from Paul.
We're still in Romans?
Yeah, we're still in Romans. I'm not going to do like a whole rundown of the entire text because it's just too bloody big.
Well, I was going to say, we've done like 4 verses so far.
Yeah,
so
we're just going to basically, if we're successful in what I'm doing, is I'm giving you a framing and I'm giving you the core trope that will then allow you to then engage the text.
Yeah.
Right? So let me read to you from Romans 7, verse 7 through 9.
Okay.
What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law, for I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Right? And the covet here is epithemia, right? But sin, taking occasion by commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was dead. For I was alive without the law once, but then when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. And the commandment, which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. What the heck is he talking about here? What Paul is doing is, I've got to explain this on 2 levels. But on a baseline level, he's saying that as a Roman, right, before I encountered Judaism, before I encountered the demands of the Mosaic law, life seemed kind of good, right? I could do what I wanted. I wasn't beholden to anything. But then once I allowed the law to take force upon me, then I've got the concept of sin. I've got the concept of am I living worthy? I've got all of these demands that are being put on me. And what happens? You fail. But what's interesting here is I want you to notice that he says, nay. He speaks, and he uses the I, right? First person singular. Now, this is another one of the errors, fundamental errors that occurs with interpretation here, is what Paul is doing here. This is a Greek literary device that is prosopopeia, which is a fictive I. And what that means is that the writer of a rhetorical piece, he assumes the character of someone to drive home a point. And so in this case, he's assuming the position as a Roman, right? I, as a Roman, who am trying to adopt the Mosaic law, and I'm finding I'm failing over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Right? And Paul does this all over the place in the text, where he assumes the role of being a Jew, right? A follower of the law proper, or he assumes the role of being a Gentile, all to drive home this point. And this is something that happens within the literary tradition all over the place. There's a really good example of this would be, say, Origen, right? One of the patristic fathers. And one of his literary adversaries is Celsus, who's anti-Christian. And they've got a whole bunch of engagements with each other about this very thing, where Origen is trying to lampoon Christians, and he adopts one of his characters as a Jew. And then Origen will go back to him and say, your prosopopeia is all wrong because that's not how a Jew would actually talk, right? And he's saying you didn't understand the element good enough. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's what Paul is doing here, is he's writing to Romans, and then he's assuming this literary device to expose the failings.
Yeah, it's really, he's setting up a persona. So prosopos is a face.
Yeah.
So he's setting up like a persona, right? I does not mean I, Paul. I is the persona that the listener is supposed to inhabit.
That's right.
And be like, oh yeah, that's right. Before I'd heard of this stuff, I didn't worry about it. Then I heard the law, and I was like, I guess I'm sinning.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And then the weight of that is upon you. And then the other part of the argument is that it lacks force because it's so alien. Right? This is literally a cross-civilizational adoption, which is massively difficult. So even if you think that there's some enticement there, right? That, yeah, there's the value in this. There's discipline that I could garner, but it's too alien. It's too foreign. And therefore, you set yourself up for failure. And so that's what Paul is doing. He's saying, so you guys have pretended like you are the creatures, the beacons of reason and self-mastery, but in reality, you're going to fail, and you can't fake it. And so everything is set up for doom. And so what's the solution? That's where Paul goes. So we could go to like Romans 7:4. Wherefore, my brethren, ye are also become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. So he's saying real self-mastery is going to be found within Christ. It's not through fealty to the Mosaic law. It's not through your other traditions, which ultimately failed you, because why are you looking over here? It's actually through Christ. So that's why he shows everything topsy-turvy.
That's interesting. So to connect to some of the earliest discussion, that is that then self-mastery is ultimately the argument that, hey, this kind of stoicism you're looking for, this kind of self-control, when you encounter the law, actually it sort of seems to go sideways for you, because you just realize you're sinning more than you thought, but the self-control you're looking for, this is charis, right, will come to you as a gift when you enter into the right relationship with Christ. Is that
Correct.
Sort of the theme of the letter?
Correct. That is the crux of Paul's argument.
Yeah.
In my reading of it.
Yeah.
And that reading is trying to strip away all of the baggage that has accrued over the multiple centuries, looking at the text as a Greco-Roman literary piece.
Yeah.
Who is the audience? How would the audience have understood it? And that's why the reference to the Medea quote is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, to be or not to be, any Greco-Roman would recognize the phrase of the dilemma that Medea is putting out there. And that's the fulcrum that Paul then uses to say, that's where you guys are.
Which is shocking, right? So this is because what he's also saying, if the audience is Roman, what he's saying is you've been, you look down on the barbarians, but actually you are
the barbarian. That's right. So he flips it. Yeah.
You need to get into a right relationship with God, and then the gift of Christ to you will be civilization in the kingdom of God.
Right. And real self-mastery can only be found through Christ.
Yeah.
So if that's what you want, this is how you get it. It's through baptism in Christ. It's not through the law. It's not through any of these other devices that will ultimately fail you.
Yeah.
Right? I think that is Book of Romans in a nutshell.
Fantastic.
All of which is completely alien from the tradition that had co-opted a different model because they were too divorced from the literary source material, because Augustine didn't speak Greek. He was divorced from that model. And then you move into the medieval period and everything goes in a different direction. And then you get the reformers and they have no clue about this stuff.
Yeah.
And then you've got, even within the restored gospel, you've got people who, we don't know about this stuff typically, right? And so they're reading it through the lens of Luther.
Instead of knowing the Hamlet reference, now they only have the Lion King, and it's turned into something different, and it's gone down the way. So that's really fascinating. I am going to have to reread Romans.
So when you do that, every time you see a reference to an I, it's a fictive I. It is prosopopeia.
Okay.
And that's the way you should see it, to say, oh, wait, he's doing this. He's creating a character, and it is designed for a Roman audience. And why is he creating that character? And it's all about self-mastery and the dangers of akrasia, which is the weakness of the will. Lack
of self-rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic, Brian. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's very cool. I'm gonna have to go reread the whole. I mean, as we're an hour and a bit in, and I think we've literally read half a dozen verses. So.
Yep, there's a lot there, and if we went more, it would be hours and hours and hours. So I tried to just focus in on a couple.
That was great. That was very good. I love the way that you showed us exactly where that quote of Medea is coming in, right? And other contemporaries of Paul using it as well. That's really compelling. That's exactly what he was doing.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Wow. Well, fantastic. Thanks for you all for watching and being here with us. This is, I guess, like, subscribe, smash the notifications bell. And until next time, stay curious and hungry.